What is a disturbing fact you wish you could unlearn? If you enjoy this video, please subscribe to my channel, where I upload daily videos. There's a type of crayfish that farms sea stars by cutting all their water legs off and eating its arms all the way to the center, but leaving the center intact. It then feeds the sea star with kelp to keep it alive so it regenerates, and then repeats the process. When the Challenger exploded in 1986, the astronauts didn't die from the explosion. Nor did they die from depressurization as NASA has initially claimed. There is some evidence they turned on their personal oxygen supply. They died from impact when they hit the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. They were in free fall for 2.5 minutes. Not only that, but NASA was fully aware of the dangers of the launch. Engineers at NASA warned officials time and time again that the fuel O-ring would fail if they launched at such a low temperature. It was pretty frigid the day of the launch, and they ignored them, just because they didn't want to have to push back the launch date. I learned on Reddit that a woodpecker will tap enough to break into a baby bird's skull and slurp up their brains. If you have an intestinal blockage, you can burp up farts and have fecal vomit, which is basically just throwing up your poop. My mother has a cousin? Honestly not sure, but a family member, who got a parasite from eating bad meat on a trip to Mexico. They couldn't remove it as it's burrowed into her brain, so it's still there till this day and she's dying. It's really sad. Last I heard was her mental health was declining rapidly. Taenia solium, depending on how it enters the body, you can end up with a 7-meter intestinal parasite, or a cyst in various organs such as the liver, the brain or muscles. That's why growing up nobody I knew ate meat of any kind anything less than medium well. There are other parasites in fish that cause serious illness. In countries where raw fish consumption is common, intestinal blockages from parasites happen relatively frequently. Funny thing is that it's not the adult parasite that's the problem, it's the babies. Those tapeworms essentially gestate in animal number 1 and can only mature when animal number 2 eats animal number 1 and the tapeworms with it. There are other tapeworms like Nana Chan who only need a single friend to live in. If everything goes as planned, animal number 1 is a mouse and animal number 2 is a cat, or animal number 1 is a piggy and animal number 2 is you. But you can also become animal number 1, in which case the poor baby has nowhere to go and will be in a cyst forever. If this happens, please do the kind thing and arrange for your corpse to be fed to dogs or other people after you die. Anyway, my exciting fun fact, the other super common intestinal friend, Ascaris, really hates anesthetics, and they will sometimes make this known by crawling out of your anus and or mouth after you get put under. Exciting fun fact number 2, while most tapeworms will happily wait for you to die and be eaten by superior animals, there's one called Echinococcus that helps you along by making really big cysts full of tapeworm fluids. If these cysts burst, you can get sepsis and die. It's like you're pregnant, except you're pregnant with a bomb, and you can be pregnant in your eye. Or lungs. Or brain. Sometimes, old people don't break their bones because they fall. They fall because they break their bones. The Chiquita Banana Company colluded with the CIA to overthrow the democratically elected government of Guatemala, leading to a civil war that lasted 46 years and directly contributed to the ongoing migrant crisis at the border. They called it Operation PB Success. They also blocked a 9/11 victims bill because it would have made it so victims of terrorism could sue companies or countries that funded said terrorists. You see where this is going. Chiquita funded militant groups in Colombia for decades. They claimed it was protection money, but they also gave the militants a list of union leaders for them to kill. Oh yeah, and the Banana Massacre when they led to the deaths of thousands of plantation workers. All because they unionized to push for things like being paid and having toilets. If your pillow is over 2 years old, up to 10% of its weight is dust mite fecal matter. My biology teacher had a Q&A session before Christmas, and one student asked if it's possible to be allergic to your own blood. Unfortunately you can. Just imagine your own immune system destroying your red blood cells, constant hemorrhaging, constantly feeling cold and out of breath. When we got back from winter break, we saw a new face in class, a former student of my bio teacher who just so happened to have this disease, and we spent the whole class asking questions. I feel so bad for the guy, but thankfully the medicine available to suppress the immune system has made his life bearable. Where's that rabies post? Rabies. It's exceptionally common, but people just don't run into the animals that carry it often. Skunks especially, and bats. Let me paint you a picture. You go camping, and at midday you decide to take a nap in a nice little hammock. While sleeping, a tiny brown bat, in the rage stages of infection, is fidgeting in broad daylight, uncomfortable, and thirsty, due to the hydrophobia, and you snort, startling him. He goes into attack mode. Except you're asleep, and he's a little brown bat, so weighs around 6 grams. You don't even feel him land on your bare knee, and he starts to bite. His teeth are tiny. Hardly enough to even break the skin, but he does manage to give you the equivalent of a tiny scrape that goes completely unnoticed. Rabies does not travel in your blood. In fact, a blood test won't even tell you if you've got it. Antibody tests may be done, but are useless if you've ever been vaccinated. You wake up, none the wiser. If you notice anything at the bite site at all, you assume you just lightly scraped it on something. The bomb has been lit, and your nervous system is the wick. The rabies will multiply along your nervous system, doing virtually no damage, and completely undetectable. You literally have no symptoms. It may be 4 days, it may be a year, but the camping trip is most likely long forgotten. Then one day your back starts to ache. Or maybe you get a slight headache? At this point, you're already dead. There is no cure. The sole caveat to this is the Milwaukee Protocol, which leaves most patients dead anyway, and the survivors mentally disabled, and is seldom done, see below. There's no treatment. It has a 100% kill rate. Absorb that. Not a single other virus on the planet has a 100% kill rate. Only rabies. And once you're symptomatic, it's over. You're dead. So what does that look like? Your headache turns into a fever, and a general feeling of being unwell. You're fidgety, uncomfortable, and scared. As the virus that has taken its time getting into your brain finds a vast network of nerve endings, it begins to rapidly reproduce, starting at the base of your brain, where your pons is located. This is the part of the brain that controls communication between the rest of the brain and body, as well as sleep cycles. Next, you become anxious. You still think you have only a mild fever, but suddenly you find yourself becoming scared, even horrified, and it doesn't occur to you that you don't know why. This is because the rabies is chewing up your amygdala. As your cerebellum becomes hot with the virus, you begin to lose muscle coordination and balance. You think maybe it's a good idea to go to the doctor now, but assuming a doctor is smart enough to even run the tests necessary in the few days you have left on the planet, odds are they'll only be able to tell your loved ones what you died of later. You're twitchy, shaking, and scared. You have the normal fear of not knowing what's going on, but with the virus really fucking the amygdala, this is amplified 100-fold. It's around this time the hydrophobia starts. You're horribly thirsty, you just want water. But you can't drink. Every time you do, your throat clamps shut and you vomit. This has become a legitimate, active fear of water. You're thirsty, but looking at a glass of water begins to make you gag, and shy back in fear. The contradiction is hard for your hot brain to see at this point. By now, the doctors will have to put you on IVs to keep you hydrated, but even that's futile. You were dead the second you had a headache. You begin hearing things, or not hearing at all as your thalamus goes. You taste sounds, you see smells, everything starts feeling like the most horrifying acid trip anyone has ever been on. With your hippocampus long under attack, you're having trouble remembering things, especially family. You're alone, hallucinating, thirsty, confused, and absolutely, undeniably terrified. Everything scares the literal shit out of you at this point. These strange people in lab coats. These strange people standing around your bed crying, who keep trying to get you drink something and crying. And it's only been about a week since that little headache that you've completely forgotten. Time means nothing to you anymore. Funny enough, you now know how the bat felt when he bit you. Eventually, you slip into the dumb rabies phase. Your brain has started the process of shutting down. Too much of it has been turned to liquid virus. Your face droops. You drool. You're all but unaware of what's around you. A sudden noise or light might startle you, but for the most part, it's all you can do to just stare at the ground. You haven't really slept for about 72 hours. Then you die. Always, you die. And there's not one freaking thing anyone can do for you. Then there's the question of what to do with your corpse. I mean, sure, burying it is the right thing to do. But the damn virus can survive in a corpse for years. You could kill every rabid animal on the planet today, and if 2 years from now, some moist, preserved, rotten hunk of used-to-be brain gets eaten by an animal, it starts all over. So yeah, rabies scares the crap out of me. And it's freaking everywhere. Source: spent a lot of time working with rabies. Would still get my vaccinations if I could afford them. Jeffrey Dahmer drilled a hole into some victims' skulls and tried pouring different toxic liquids into the hole. He was trying to make a slave that could eat and drink but could in no way fight back or escape. The worst fact is that victims might survive the first hole with all brain function intact and live long enough to be fully aware they were going to get a second or third hole drilled. One of the victims managed to escape, the police were called, and somehow the police turned the 14-year-old victim back over to Dahmer. There is a type of insomnia that will kill you. Life expectancy is around a year after onset. FFI, fatal familial insomnia. Two types, in fact. Almost exactly the same, however, FFI is genetic, whereas the other isn't. Both are caused by prions. Terrifying. Edit, forgot to include that the name of the non-genetic variant is called sporadic fatal insomnia. Enjoy the nightmares. A man named Hisashi Aochi in 1999 suffered immense radiation poisoning after a nuclear accident. In fact, he is known to have taken more radiation poisoning than anyone else in history. Because of this radiation, it messed up his chromosomes as well as his cells and mind system. He was kept alive for 83 days by scientists and doctors. During that time, by day 20, almost all the skin on his body had fallen off, leaving his entire body in constant pain. Later, the skin around his eyes as well as his eyelids also came off, so his eyes were always open even when asleep. His eyes would also something leak blood, making it look as though he was crying. His intestines were so messed up that he started to have constant diarrhea, which soon started to have large amounts of blood because his intestines were starting to decay from the inside. On day 53 his heart stopped 3 times, but scientists and doctors were able to restart it. He was basically only being kept alive by machines at this point, and the doctors started questioning if it would be more humane to let the man die, as he was in very obvious, unimaginable, indescribable levels of pain and suffering. Some doctors even said that it was torture forcing him to live like this. Due to the radiation, almost all the muscles in his body had been destroyed. The only one that wasn't was his heart, which was still being kept alive from the various machines. The worst part of all of this is that Aochi was completely conscious throughout all of it, and while he couldn't talk due to tubes being in his throat to help him breathe, as the radiation also destroyed his lungs, he was in obvious pain every time someone touched him, or even while he was just laying on his bed. And while around the 2-month mark, it's unknown if he even felt pain, as he stopped reacting to being touched as well as stopped thriving in agony 24/7. His pupils still shrank when light was shown into them, suggesting brain activity. Hopefully he did stop feeling pain by then, if not, then that makes it even worse. His body around day 80 was quite obviously to anyone at this point unsalvageable, and mold was starting to develop on his skinless body. He was even described as a corpse with a beating heart, so they decided that trying to save him wasn't worth it and pulled his plug. When they did, they studied his body and found out that his organs had all started to decay when he was still alive. All of this and more happened to one man who should have been killed out of mercy for his sake. Hisashi Aochi has probably had the most painful, torturous, slowly agony death of all time. TLDR, don't retire in Vegas. In some states in the USA, particularly Nevada, your doctor can basically sell you to a company. If you're a senior with an untrustworthy doctor, they can throw memory loss, hysteria, confusion, etc. on a piece of paper and hand it over to a company. This company can claim guardianship over you without you ever meeting or hearing of them. And they can take you out of your house, sell your house and all of your belongings, put you in a nursing home, and have full control over your finances. They can force you to take medication every day for the rest of your life that make you confused and unable to think clearly, until you die. They can bar your family from visiting you as well. And it's all 100% legal. Before you even find out it's happened to you, there's already been a court hearing where the judge is persuaded into signing your life into some stranger's hands based on your doctor's false claims. Not that I want to unlearn it though. I think more people should know about it. That a dolphin committed suicide after falling in love with its handler that used to jerk the dolphin off. I watched a documentary about this, and he didn't go to the ocean. He went to a basement in a tank the size of a dolphin coffin where he had to sit in his own shit and couldn't move. Since the building lacked sunlight and space, Peter quickly deteriorated and eventually committed suicide by drowning. Dolphin activist Rick O'Berry explains, dolphins are not automatic air breathers like we, humans, are. Every breath is a conscious effort. If life becomes too unbearable, the dolphins just take a breath and they sink to the bottom. They don't take the next breath. Surgeons used to operate on infants without anesthesia, including open heart surgery. They have stopped this, however. In the 1980s. I was a lot happier before I knew that tonsil stones were a thing. My tonsil abscessed in my 20s, swelled up so much my throat was almost closed. Went to emergency and a doctor pulled out this huge syringe. Explained that he would poke the abscess and drain to find the infection. I had some kind of topical freezing. The first spot he jabbed, depressed syringe. Blood. Pulled it out and tried another spot. Again blood. Mind you, the freezing agent only worked for the top, so I felt everything. The third try he depressed syringe and it looked like yellow milk. After that he got out the scalpel and sliced into the tonsil at the third spot. Then with tongs pushed and it was like a huge zip, my tonsil gushed out all this pus. I had one of those suction siphons they use at dentist. For like 20 minutes they told me to create suction and spit into the cup. Afterwards I was placed on N4 and kept there for 3 days. They said I was lucky for not getting blood poisoning. After that tonsils were removed. Wish I never had them. Almost every year before, once it got cold, I'd get sore throats. Without tonsils almost never happens. There is a chance you might fall in a sleep paralysis-like state when under anesthesia. Meaning you'll feel your surgery while being unable to move. I feel bad for Diavolo now. I've woken up twice under anesthesia and the second time was before my procedure. I heard the doctor and nurse arguing about whether or not to go ahead with it because my heart rate suddenly skyrocketed and my nurse was insistent I was awake. The next day, my entire body was sore from trying to scream. Did you tell the doctor that the nurse was right? I'm reminded of a story of a man who went in for an EP scan, a heart operation that involves trying to stop the heart, so the defect that causes an arrhythmia that can be corrected, which the patient needs to be conscious for. So they gave him a drug that causes amnesia so at least he wouldn't be traumatized by the memory. Supposedly at one point, he said to the doctors, "Hey, remember when I died a few minutes ago? Well, I do, too. Give me more." Most schizophrenics unalive themselves during a lucid period. I learned that fact, but I regret the day I understood it. I'm a psychiatrist, MD, and, during medical school, I had the privilege of working at ANGBRI building as part of my psych rotation. My very last day, I stayed late to check up on a man with schizophrenia who was generally pretty disorganized. When I was questioning him, he seemed more lucid, and he mentioned something about studying literature. Having recently been half an English major in college, I engaged him, and he started rhapsodizing about Faulkner, Tennessee Williams, really insightful comments. Then he moved on to music, jazz especially. I spent an hour after my shift with that man, just listening. I passed an attending when I went to write my notes, told him what had happened, awe and joy in my voice. He informed me that the man was a former professor, had 2 PhDs. He said that many people with severe mental illness are living in 1-2 rooms of a mansion, and once in a while, the lights come on in the rest of the house, and you can see what it once was. And so can they. A friend of mine used to work summers at a camp for developmentally disabled people. He said there was one guy who was pretty much just a happy, smiling and laughing guy who couldn't do much for himself and didn't talk. But then he would have these lucid periods. He didn't want to live this way. He hated it. He wanted to die. He could perfectly communicate all the things he felt. These periods were brief and then he would revert to being happily quiet. My friend said it was the scariest thing he had ever seen and that it terrified him on a personal level. I'm inclined to agree. The way flies eat, they land on your food and they freaking puke their digestive juices into your food and slurp the vomited juices back in. The story of John Jones, the cave explorer who got stuck upside down inside Nutty Putty caves. For close to 24 hours he was jammed between 2 rock formations head first. Basically hanging upside down. Unable to move. He breathed in and wiggled into a crevice thinking it got bigger and he could turn around. When his lungs expanded he was stuck. He died because being stuck head first made all the blood rush to his brain and his organs started to shut down. His brother tried to rescue him and his pregnant wife was outside the cave. To this day his body is still stuck in Nutty Putty caves. Do not look at the pictures if you're claustrophobic. Fetal abductions aka cesarean kidnapping. I learned about this as my wife was bedridden in the hospital carrying our first. Really struck a nerve. Blobfish. In their natural environment, they are actually not that ugly looking. The reason they look so horrific in all those pictures is because their natural environment is deep beneath the ocean's surface, and when they're caught they are exposed to catastrophic decompression as they're reeled to the surface. There is traces of plastic now being found in umbilical cords. Know how a slinky can get one kink in it and it's like totally messed up and then you get another kink in it trying to fix it and before long the whole thing is fricked? Well, your brain is full of slinkies made of carbon and nitrogen and oxygen and hydrogen atoms. Quintillions of them. More slinkies in one brain than stars in the entire universe. And when one of them gets kinked, oh man. It just chain reacts until your brain melts. TLDR, I had a brain injury and I'm not the same. I wish I didn't know. I wish I could forget the fact that I'm different from who I used to be. After receiving a brain injury in February 2020, I have both forgotten and relearned many things, even how to read. I've recovered massively, but many of my old passions have become frustrating to me. I struggle reading maths, code, dense text, etc., whereas I used to enjoy leading projects with friends and teaching others about maths and science. Although frustrating, I enjoy challenging myself to relearn these things and aim to return to my past skill level. The real scary part is that I've fundamentally changed as a person. If I remember back to before the accident, it's a different person to me. Me? Acts in ways so alien to me that I feel I so sure never would have acted. Nothing to be ashamed of, they just weren't me. Very real relationships that I still feel strongly in my heart, linked to memories that feel completely fake to me, as though I'm watching some kind of movie. I even doubt their accuracy. A person I considered a father figure and close friend passed away just before my accident, and I spent my time in rehab not able to properly mourn. Sometimes I'd forget he'd passed away, and other times I'd feel like an imposter for inheriting such important items from him. To me, it's like I'm tarnishing his legacy. I know he wouldn't think that, but I want to be the old me again. Since I can't, I wish I could at least forget that I've forgotten and changed so much. 1. One of the Columbine shooters didn't die when he shot himself. He instead drowned in his own blood next to his friend who was the other shooter, missing the top half of his head from a self-inflicted shotgun blast. 2. The bodies of the victims at Columbine, and the shooters, were left in the library overnight. 3. Adolf Hitler lost one of his testicles in World War I. As always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, show your support. Leave your thoughts and opinions down below.